I think some of y'all have figured this out by now, but I like movies. I like movies so much, I usually watch the Academy Awards in the spring. Yes, I'm one of those people. And you say, well, how can you stand to watch those spoiled movie stars talk about politics? I have to admit that annoys me. But I do enjoy some parts of it, and every year there's something that makes me glad I watched. And one year, it was actually 1984. Now, I was a kid then. I was a teenager, but I still remember this. Sally Field won the Academy Award for a movie called Places in the Heart. By the way, side note, if you've never seen Places in the Heart, it's a really dumb title. It sounds like a Hallmark movie, but ladies, I'm sorry, I'm not insulting Hallmark movies. I'm just saying, I guess I am, but I don't mean to. It's not a movie just for women, is what I'm saying. It's a very, very good movie. It's probably in my top 10 all time. But she won the Oscar for that. It was the second time. She'd won 2 years before. And she gave a speech that is often made fun of today. People say that she got up and she just said, "You like me, you really, really like me." Well, that's not exactly what she said. I'm going to read you the quote. She said, "I haven't had an orthodox career, and I've wanted more than anything to have your respect. The first time I didn't feel it, but this time I feel it. And I can't deny the fact that you like me. Right now, you like me." She wasn't talking to the movie-going public. She wasn't talking to us people sitting at home. She was talking to her peers, fellow actors and directors, other people in the movie business. And what I liked about that, what I still like about that, and why she still kind of has a soft spot in my heart, maybe a terrible person, I don't know, but I've always liked her since then because it was so real and it spoke to something I think we all feel. Think about who she was, okay? For those of you that are into movies and things, you'll get this. Others may have to Google this. But up until that point, she was known for things like Gidget, The Flying Nun. Most of all, she was Burt Reynolds' girlfriend in the Smokey and the Bandit movies. I'm sorry, some of y'all love those movies. Not exactly Meryl Streep type stuff. I mean, this is not high prestige type stuff. And yet now she receives these 2 awards from her peers that say, "You're at the top." And it meant everything to her. And I think we can all identify with that, even if most of us have never acted beyond, 5th grade show for our parents, Christmas pageant or whatever. But there's been studies done that prove that approval and encouragement and applause are things we all crave. One of the studies that I enjoyed the most reading about was they actually took people and they went off to these people, the people in the study, they went to their family and friends and they said, "Write letters to this person telling them how much you love them, telling them, here's what I appreciated about you." Then they got that person and they hooked them up to all the brain scans and they read the letters to them out loud. And they saw what happened with their brain activity. Their brain activity, while they were hearing these good things said about them, was almost identical to the brain activity of a person eating a bowl of ice cream. What that means is, if you don't have any friends, just eat ice cream. No, that's not what it means. What it means is there is a pleasure we experience that is just sublime when we hear good things said about us or to us by others. We crave that. Some of us more than others, but all of us need it to some extent. Now, what I want to talk to you about is how that can become toxic, how that can become idolatrous. I start tonight by making a confession. Now, of all the idols that I'm talking about in this study, this is the one that I struggle with the most. And I do this as a way of example so that you will say, "Okay, Jeff, let me see what my big one is." That's what I'm trying to get you to do. And let me tell you when this first kicked in for me. When I was in 4th grade, I had been going to this little country school out near where I grew up, and then my parents put me in the school in town. Yoakum isn't a big town, but I went from a K through 8 school that had maybe 50 kids in it to 4th grade had probably twice as many, if not more than that. So that was a big jump up. I didn't know more than 1 or 2 of those kids going in. I felt a little lost at first. in the springtime, they had an academic competition. And so kids from schools all over that region came to our campus, and we had contests in math and science, and my competition was in oral reading. So my teacher, Mrs. Nelson, picked out a poem for me to read. I can still remember what it was. It was called The Boy Who Laughed at Santa Claus by Ogden Nash. So I had to read this poem in front of the judges. At the end of the day, we gathered in the auditorium, all these schools from all over the region, and we sat down on the floor and we listened as they read off the winners of number sense and the winners of this and that, and then they got to oral reading, and they got to first place, and they said, first place, Jeff Berger from Yoakum. And all of my fourth grade classmates just cheered like crazy, like we'd won the Super Bowl. And I walked up front and I got my blue ribbon or whatever they gave me, and everybody was just patting me on the back and telling me how great I did. And that felt really good. To go from, I don't really know any of you people now, all of a sudden, for that brief moment, I was kind of a star. That felt really good. That can become addictive. That can become something you crave. So what I want to talk about is, how do we know when that's gone from, yeah, that's really nice, I kind of needed that, which is fine, to this is what motivates me. This is where I seek my worth, my value. This is what I crave in life. This is what determines decisions I make, which makes it an idol. So let me start. First scripture is John 12:42 through 43, as you see in your notes. This is one of the more surprising stories of approval idolatry you could ever name. It says, nevertheless, many of the authorities believed in him, meaning Jesus, but for fear of the Pharisees, they did not confess it, so that they would not be put out of the synagogue. For they loved the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God. So it is taught, and that's a very revealing passage. We don't see that really anywhere else in the Gospels. What it tells us is the authorities that ended up conspiring to put Jesus on the cross, many of them actually believed. They actually believed that, yeah, he probably is the Messiah. Who else could do these kinds of signs? Who else could heal the way he does? Who else could cast out demons the way he does? Who else could teach the way that he does? It's obvious he's more than just a man. This is the guy we've been praying for. Our people have prayed for centuries. This is the answer to our cravings and our hurts and our problems. This is what we've been looking for. This is salvation in a man. And yet, I might lose my position in the synagogue. Here I am. I'm this religious authority figure. I've reached the highest level in our society that a person can reach, and I might lose it all if I declare my belief in him. More than that, I will lose the respect of my peers, my fellow religious authorities, the Pharisees, these laymen who basically are sort of the militia, the religious militia of Jerusalem. I mean, they're the ones who make sure everybody's on point theologically and morally. They might turn against me too. Right now I have their respect. Right now I have their approval. I could lose all of that, and therefore I'm going to forfeit salvation, and therefore I'm going to consent to destroying my nation's Messiah. Think about that. Think about the cost of approval idolatry for those men and for the nation of Israel. So when I talk about approval addiction or approval idolatry, I really mean two different kinds. And the first kind is the kind I talked about at the beginning when I was getting the applause of all my fourth grade classmates back in Yoakum back then. And that is the kind that says, I need to be the center of attention. If there's applause to be had, I want it to be for me. I love a quote about Teddy Roosevelt. By the way, Teddy Roosevelt, probably one of my top 5 presidents that I love to read about and admire, and yet he was an attention hound. He loved to be the center of everything. And someone said this quote of him, he wants to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. I think that's just about as good as you can say it. And some of us have that personality. If there's going to be a joke that gets to be told, we want to tell it, especially if people are going to laugh. If there's an idea that everybody's going to rally around, we want to be the one to share it. And in fact, it gets on our nerves if somebody else gets that attention, if somebody else gets that adulation. If somebody else tells the joke and we say, well, I told that joke the other day, nobody laughed. And it makes us angry. We need to win. We need to be seen as successful. We need to be admired. 3 John 9, the little book of 3 John that we so rarely talk about or read or certainly preach about. Verse 9, the apostle writes, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. That's literally the only time Diotrephes is mentioned in the Bible. And what it says about him is he loves to be first. Now, is it a bad thing if you are in a competition to want to win? Of course not. Is it a bad thing for you to want to be the best at what you do? No. These things can motivate you to greatness. Is it wrong if someone wants to compliment you? Should you say, oh, please don't compliment me. There's nothing special about me. No, don't do that. If people come to you and compliment you, accept it graciously. It's a gift from the Lord. But here's the line. Do you need those things in order to be happy? Can you go a day? Can you go a week? Can you go a month without anybody making a big to-do over you? Or do you have to be the center of everything, of every competition, of every conversation, of every gathering? Do you always have to make it about yourself? That's the line. The other form of approval addiction is it's more personal. You're not a person, and I'd say this is most of you. You don't really want to be the center of attention. You certainly don't want to be up behind a microphone or on a stage. Applause just sort of embarrasses you. Lots and lots of compliments just sort of make you feel awkward. But you would say, my life only has meaning and I only have work if this person or these people love and respect me. And that can be a romantic partner or a potential romantic partner. It can be your parents. It can be your kids. It can be your family as a whole. It can be your colleagues at work. Maybe those are the people that matter most, or your peers in your field. The other accountants that you know, or the other attorneys you know, or the other school teachers you know, or the other whatever. It could be that you just need their approval. It could even be the people of your social circle. It could be the people of your gender. I'm told, never been a woman, but I'm told that women dress more to impress other women than they do to impress men. That when they're looking in the mirror, they're thinking, okay, what are the girls going to think when I walk in this? Are they going to judge me? It's good not to be a woman, isn't it, guys? Boy, I can't think of one way they have it better than we do. I really don't. Plus, they have to live with us. Now, don't get me wrong. Again, we all need people in our lives whose approval is important. I'll tell you this right now. I want to believe that you think I'm doing a good job as a pastor. That's important to me. And don't take this personally, but the opinion of the woman I live with matters more than all of y'all put together. So if she thought less of me, it would kill me. And yet that can become an idol if it controls you. If it becomes your consuming passion. And there's a religious version of this, and the Pharisees had that. In Matthew 23, the whole chapter of Matthew 23 is something else, because Jesus has been patient with the scribes and Pharisees. He's been tolerant, he's been kind, he's been gracious, and now in the last week of his life, he just lets them have it. And he says in verse 5 in Matthew 23, they do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. Phylacteries were the little boxes that a Jew, and some Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews still to this day, wear on their forehead or on their wrist, containing scripture. There was the fringes referred to the tassels of the prayer shawls that would stick out of the shirt that they would wear. Again, you go to Jerusalem or New York City or any place where you find an ultra-Orthodox community, and you'll see the men walking along, and they have you can see the little tassels sticking out under the hem of their shirt. And what Jesus is saying is they would check that and say, okay, I want mine to be bigger than Eleazar's or than Abraham's because I want people to know I'm even more righteous. Now, no Baptist would ever do anything like that, right? We would never say, well, I better be there in church because, brother so-and-so is going to know if I'm not. And they're going to judge me if I'm not. And I need to make sure that I'm dressed the way that they want me to be dressed. And when it's time to ask someone to pray, I sure hope the pastor points to me because I sure like to be asked to pray because that makes me look a little more righteous. We would never do that. Well, maybe we would. Question, is it ever good to care what others think of you? I think it is. There was one time I preached on this, and I think I was a little too hard-nosed about it, and a member of this church who's not here tonight, but who I very much respect, came up to me and said, if you're telling me that I should never care at all what anybody thinks of me, I don't think that's possible. And I said, no, I think you're right. I think you'd have to be an absolute psychopath to just not care what anybody thinks of you. And in fact, it is good to have a good reputation. The Bible talks about this over and over again. A good name is better than gold. Acts 2 verse 47 says that the early church, the disciples and those first Christians, that they had, and I quote, they had the favor of all the people, which is a remarkable statement. Just weeks before they were crucifying Jesus, they were shouting, crucify him, crucify him. Now they're looking at his followers saying, those people are pretty good. I like them. I'm glad they're here. It is good to have a good reputation. It is good to be well thought of. But where's the line come in? That's what I want to talk to you about. Because a need for approval can absolutely ruin us. Think about some of the ways approval idolatry leads to other sins. Because this is what idolatry does. It brings out sin in us that wouldn't be there otherwise. I can think of several. Gossip is often motivated by approval idolatry. I say bad things about you when you're not around because everybody else is doing it and I want to be part of the group. I don't want to be the stick in the mud who says, no, wait a second. She wouldn't want you talking about her that way. Or, hey, listen, he's my friend. Let's not say such things. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the killjoy. I'm going to join in the fun. And maybe in saying bad things about you, I'm taking some of the heat off myself, you see. Maybe I can even say that really funny thing about you that everybody laughs at, and that drives my stock up even higher. Or think about how sexual sin is often a result of approval idolatry, as someone does the calculus of saying, if I sleep with him, with her, then I have a better chance of keeping them. And that's that idea that I must have that person's love, that person's affection, that person's approval. Religious legalism, we've already talked about how we make decisions based on, I want to be approved by my church, and therefore these things I will do because they're smiled upon by my tradition, by my church. I'm not doing them for the Lord. I'm doing them to be seen by my church family. I'm doing them for the praise that I receive. I can remember my first ministry job was as a youth minister. And the pastor, who's still there to this day, this is 30 years. He's still at the same church. Great man. But anyway, he was fairly new as a pastor at that point. And it was the end of Vacation Bible School. And we'd all worked hard at VBS. And he got up at the end and he read off a list of all the people to say thank you to for their hard work that week, and he missed one. And boy, she was upset. She let him have it. She had worked so hard that week, and he didn't even mention her. And I think, well, your praise is in heaven. You ought to be glad he didn't mention you. You might even get greater glory in heaven if you don't get glory down here. But that's that desire for that approval and applause that we so desperately need. And then there's what I call niceness instead of kindness. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with being nice. I was raised to be nice. I bet you were too. What I mean by nice is polite, considerate, not stepping on anyone's toes, not hurting anyone's feelings unnecessarily. All of that's good. But kindness is a little different. Kindness, which is actually commanded in Scripture, which is a fruit of the Spirit, is I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, if I were you, what would I need someone to do for me? So it's going beyond just being nice. It's going beyond just not stepping on toes. And sometimes it's even stepping on toes. There's a kindness that you do for me when you come up to me and you say, Jeff, I love you, but you've got to stop doing this. I see you headed down a road that is destructive, that is bad for your witness, that is bad for your family. That's a kindness. It doesn't feel good when you do it, but it's a kindness. Approval addiction won't let you do those kinds of things because the worst thing in the world is that I might be angry at you. So you'd rather let me continue down a road to destruction and not confront me about it because there's a chance I might get angry. And you wouldn't want that, would you? You see how approval addiction can stop us from being the kinds of Christians that the church needs, that we need each other to be. Think about Jesus for a minute. Jesus, it says, was rejected. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. When you think about the course of Jesus' life, even his own brothers, according to John 7, didn't believe in him. His disciples turned and ran away from him in his hour of darkest need. I mean, this is a man who knew rejection. His own people called out for his crucifixion. The leaders of his people were against him from the start. If Jesus had been motivated by approval, he never would have continued with his ministry. Now, do I believe that it stung Jesus when he felt rejection by others? Absolutely. Because the Bible is quite clear that he's human. Yes, he is God, but he is human. He felt everything we feel. There's this story, this very, very poignant story in the Gospels where he says some hard things to the crowd, and the crowd all leaves, and they walk away. You know, 1 minute, Jesus got this massive following, and the next minute, it's just him and the 12. And Jesus looks at the 12 and says, "Are you going to leave too?" And I read that as being filled with sorrow. Are you going to leave me too? I mean, Jesus took it personally. But there's a difference between, I feel rejected, this hurts deeply. There's a difference between that, which is human, which is normal, which is natural, and saying, I will do anything to keep that from happening. I will compromise any ethic. I will say no to any call. I will. If Jesus was motivated by approval, he would have stopped his mission the first time he felt rejected. The first time he heard the religious leaders say, you can't say those things, he would have said, no, you're right, back off. I promise, I won't go so far anymore. Jesus never would, his mission was to be rejected for us. He was not motivated by approval. How did he do it? How did he put up with, how can you live that way for years and not lose your mind? I think we get a clue in Matthew 3:16 through 17. On the day of his baptism, it says, as soon as he came up out of the water, the sky opened and he saw God's Spirit coming down on him like a dove. A voice from heaven said, this is my son, the one I'm loved. I am very pleased with him. So God the Father is affirming God the Son, and God the Spirit is there as well. And God says this out loud. Have you ever been praised in front of others? And how good that feels. When I was a kid, I was never a great athlete. I loved sports, so I played them all my youth, but never really the star. And I can remember my last year of Little League. I fell on the playground at school that day and I fractured my wrist. I didn't know it was broken because I could still sort of move it. So I played a couple of baseball games like that. And then my mom said, listen, you can't even throw the ball from second base to home. There's something wrong. And she got me x-rayed, and they found a hairline fracture in my wrist. So all of that to say, there was a day when my dad is talking to a bunch of other adults. There's all these adults are sitting around talking, and I didn't even know what they were talking about. I just heard my dad say, well, I know my boy's tough because he played 2 baseball games with a broken wrist. And my head went, whoop. I mean, to hear your dad say that, that's pretty powerful. That's pretty special.
But it was true, right?
Well, about me? I guess. But my point is, Jesus heard his Father say that to this massive crowd. There are many, many times in the Gospels where we see Jesus leave his disciples, walk away, get away by himself to be alone with the Father. In Matthew 17, verse 5, he goes up on the Mount of Transfiguration with Peter, James, and John. He hears the voice again. This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. The night before he dies, John 17:5, he's praying this high priestly prayer to the Father. And he says, and now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed. I read in that, Father, we had something special. We've had something special forever. And we've been living at a distance now for 33 years. And I'm so close to coming back home. Bring me back home. I can't wait to have that again. And then one of the last things he said from the cross in Luke 23:46, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. If you want to know how Jesus could handle the rejection of so many, it's because in the end, the only acceptance he needed was the acceptance of his Father. And he had that. And that's what motivated him. That's what drove him. That's what kept him going through all the pains and the sorrows that he went through for us. So how do we know if we have this approval addiction? You may say, Jeff, this is seriously not something I struggle with. You know, the interesting thing is when you read books about idolatry, and believe it or not, there are a lot of scholarly books about the subject. And several of them talk about there's such a thing as a deep idol. There's idols like money and like sex, like we've talked about so far. But then there are deep idols, and deep idols are idols that manifest in so many different ways. Your struggle with approval may not be like mine. But the truth is most of us deal with this to one extent or another. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some symptoms. Pretend you're at the doctor's office. And instead of asking you what your temperature is and do you have postnasal drip or aches or chills or, a tummy ache, I'm going to list some symptoms and you see if one or more of those are true of you. And the first one is, I can't say no, so I overcommit instead of risking disappointing someone. How many of us constantly say, oh, sure, I'll do that? I'm afraid to risk failure or embarrassment. This is one reason, by the way, I think, not the only one, but one reason why so many of us are terrified to volunteer for any kind of ministry, especially any kind of upfront ministry. Oh, I don't want to talk. I don't want to be seen, because we can't risk the possibility that we might look foolish. There's nothing worse for us than that feeling of embarrassment. How about this? I'm two-faced. Nobody would say that out loud about themselves, but are you? Do you talk about others instead of speaking to them? Rather than lovingly confront someone about their problems, it's more fun to talk about them behind their back. You're nice to them to their face, but behind their back, you're more honest about how you really feel. How about this one? It bothers me terribly to have anyone angry with me. Of course, we should care if we hurt somebody's feelings. We should care if we let someone down. But if you can't handle that disappointment, if you can't give them room to get over their anger, right? That was one of my problems in our early days of our marriage. I couldn't handle her being mad at me. I would be like, can you just hit me or something? Can you yell at me? That wasn't her personality. She just needed to be away from me and just calm down. I couldn't handle that. We need to be able to let people be angry at us sometimes. They deserve to be angry at us sometimes. Sometimes that's what we got coming to us. How about this? Criticism sticks with me. I get defensive or angry when someone points out things I need to improve. You ever heard the saying, if 100 people compliment you and one criticizes you, you remember the one? Y'all familiar with that? There's a reason why that's true for many of us, and that is because of this approval idolatry. We fixate on that one person who said that one critical thing, and how dare they think that, and oh, they're just so wrong. Well, maybe. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are. I'm not going to give you the whole one, but there's another great Teddy Roosevelt quote about the man in the arena is always the one that gets criticized. The only way to not get criticized is to not do anything. But when you get criticized, you need to step back and go, is there truth to it? Is there something I can learn from this? If you can't do that, if you're incapable of doing that, then what does that say about your need for approval? I am overly concerned with appearance. I dress to be noticed. Nothing wrong with looking appropriate or even looking your best, but what's your motivation? Here's a way to measure this. Do you spend more time working on your outward appearance than you do on your walk with the Lord? It's just a kind of a funny thought experiment for you. The next time you see a group picture with you in it, where does your eye go? You immediately look for yourself, right? How do I look? How do I look in this? Oh, wow, I look really bad. Let me see if I can get this picture out of this frame and maybe do away with it. Why do we do that? I mean, everybody knows how you really look. And why does that one picture just scandalize you? I get resentful when someone else is praised, when their idea gets noticed or their joke gets laughed at. If you've ever said out loud or in your own mind, I don't see why everybody seems to think so-and-so is so great, there's probably a reason for that. That's what you might call approval envy. And for some reason, you feel like their glory somehow diminishes you. I think most of us can identify. I avoid tough conversations. Proverbs 27:6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Are you faithful enough to wound someone who needs to hear it? How often are you able to confront people who are making terrible choices? Are you bold enough to share your faith with people, even though you're risking the fact that they may decide you're just a crazy religious person? And finally, I often say I don't care what others think of me. Now, this is the curveball I'm throwing at you, because some of you are sitting there saying, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. But you probably like to tell people that, don't you? I've had these friends in my life. I always have a handful of friends like this who are like, man, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. Don't care one bit. I just tell the truth, man. I don't care if it makes people mad. Well, then why are you telling me? Why are you so intent on me knowing that? I'm just the truth guy. I don't care about your feelings. Okay. Well, actually, why are you telling me you're a jerk but blaming God for making you that way? I don't understand. I don't think that's the way it works. So why not instead say, I'm just not where I need to be as a man or a woman of God. My character's not where it should be. I end up hurting people unnecessarily. So if I do that, please tell me. That's a better way to handle that, if that's your personality type. But if otherwise you're just walking around telling people, I just don't care, well, that's image management. You want to be seen as the tough person. And that's another form of approval addiction. And if right now you want to ask me to step outside, I've got about 15 more minutes. Okay. We started talking by looking at two different kinds of approval addiction. So let's talk about two different ways of overcoming this. And the first one is Galatians 1:10. Words of the Apostle Paul, for am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. You may not think about Paul this way, but Paul was a recovering approval addict. And the reason I say this is when he talks about himself in Philippians 4, what does he say? He says, I was zealous for my people. I was a Hebrew of Hebrews. I was a member of the tribe of Benjamin. As for the adherence to the law, I was a Pharisee. He's talking about his credentials. He's talking about the resume he offered the way he held himself up as a rising star. We don't get this because being really religious is not a way to earn status in our culture. But in Paul's culture, it was. In Paul's culture, that was the way. That was more esteemed than someone who had lots of money, or someone who was really attractive, or certainly someone who was talented in sports or singing or acting. The star of stars was the person who was the rabbi's pet, or the person who had shown more zeal for the God of Israel. And that was Paul. He did all of this to rise in the eyes of his teachers and his peers among the Pharisees. But when Jesus came into his life, guess what happened? All of that was gone in a heartbeat, in an instant. Remember when you read Acts 9 and Paul gets saved, what's the next thing that happens? I mean, after Ananias comes and heals him and calls him Brother Saul, which I love, the next thing that happens is the Jews in Damascus try to kill him, and they have to lower him out over the city wall in a basket. Paul goes from the superstar among his people to now they want to kill me, and I'm sneaking away like a criminal. So all of that once fed his ego, all of that approval that he once gained was now gone. And so years later, as he's writing to the Galatians, he's saying, I had to make a decision a long time ago. Was I going to live for the approval of men, or was I going to live for the approval of God? I made that decision. And every day I'm living it out. And if I chose to live for man's approval, I couldn't serve Christ. That's the decision you and I need to make. We need to ask ourselves, which is it going to be? How am I going to serve the Lord? And what areas of approval addiction are true of me? And am I going to bring them to Him and offer them up to Him and say, Lord, heal me, cure me, help me to see it is better for me to serve you and to make you proud than it is to receive the applause of men. The other scripture from Paul I want to read to you is 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 22. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. So you contrast those two scriptures. In the one scripture, you hear Paul say, I don't need the approval of humans. But in the second, he says, I do care what they think. I'm just not motivated by what they think of me. I care what they think about Christ because of me. See, some of us, if we wrote this in our own words, would have to admit, I am all things to all people, that by all means I might please everybody. And that's no way to live, is it? That's a road to unhappiness. That's a road to misery, and it's certainly a road that's going to miss God's plan for you. Paul was able to say, I'm going to do everything I can for every person I meet to make sure that the impression of Jesus they get from me meets their needs. So if they're Jewish, I'm going to appeal to them on the basis of the law. If they're Gentile, I'm going to appeal to them on the basis of someone who knows nothing about God at all. Whatever their context, I'm going to meet them where they are, because I'm not trying to impress them about what a great guy I am. I'm trying to show them what a great Savior Jesus is. That should be our goal, that we'd be able to say, in all my relationships, I'm willing to do whatever it takes so that this person knows who Jesus is in their own way, in their own terms, so they can believe in Him. Are any of us there? Oh, of course not. Are some of us people who have to admit, this is a real problem for me? When I was listing those symptoms, did some of you go, ooh, that hits me right where I live? Bring it to the Father. He's not going to scold you for it. He's going to say, yeah, I know. I've been waiting for you to come with me with that. And then pray. just personal testimony. I've come a long way since fourth grade. Aren't you glad? I still struggle with this. I still don't love hurting people's feelings. I still don't love those hard conversations where I know somebody's going to be upset. It still bothers me when somebody's angry or disappointed in me. But I found that I'm able to do the right thing and to serve Christ even when I know it's going to cause problems, even when I know it's going to make someone less agreeable toward me for a while. And God's brought me that far, and He will continue to do so. And I think He will. In fact, I know He will for you as well. And I can tell you that is a much, much happier place to live.